When a person knows they are dying, what they say in their final moments tells you everything about who they really were. Not what they said when they were comfortable and composed. What they said when the last of their strength was leaving them. When the words cost everything to produce. When they could have said anything, could have spoken about themselves, about their legacy, about what they were leaving behind, and they chose what they chose. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, knew he was dying. He had been ill for 13 days. He was 63 years old. And in the final hours, in the moments when his voice was barely above a whisper, he said things that his companions carried with them for the rest of their lives. Things that some of them could not speak about without weeping decades later. And what he chose to say, what he spent his last strength saying, is something every Muslim should know. Because it tells you who he was. And it tells you what you meant to him. Welcome to Gentle Ustaz. Subscribe and turn on the bell. This one is important. Let us begin. I want to tell you about a woman who read the account of the Prophet's final days for the first time as an adult. Not as a child hearing a summary. As a grown woman sitting with the actual narration of what happened in that room. And I want to tell you what happened to her when she got to the part that most people have never read carefully. Stay with me until we get there. She was 34 years old and she had been a Muslim her whole life. She knew the story of the Prophet the way most born Muslims know it, in broad strokes, in highlights, in the version that fits inside a Friday sermon or a children's book. She knew he was born in Mecca, received the first revelation at 40, migrated to Medina, united the Arabian Peninsula and died at 63. She knew these facts the way she knew historical dates, correctly, without feeling. She had never sat down as an adult and read the detailed account of his final days. Not because she had avoided it. Because it had never occurred to her that there was something in that account she did not already know. She thought she had heard it all. She had not. She was going through a difficult season in her life when a friend suggested she read it. Not as a prescription for what she was going through. Just, have you ever read this properly? She said she had. Her friend said read it again. Slowly. The full account. Not the summary. She found the narration that night and she started reading. And the first thing that struck her was the physical detail. She had known abstractly that the Prophet was ill before he died. She had not sat with the specific description of what those 13 days looked like. The fever that was so intense his companions said it was like touching two men at once. The headaches so severe he wrapped his head with cloth. The days when he was too weak to lead the community in prayer and asked his closest companion to lead instead. The morning when he came out of his room and sat at the back while his companion led the prayer, and his companions were so relieved to see him they almost broke their prayer to greet him. And he smiled at them from where he was sitting and gestured for them to continue. She read slowly. And she cried for the first time somewhere around the description of his final morning. The day he knew was the last. He had received permission, and this detail stopped her completely. Permission. From Allah. To leave this world or to remain. And he chose to leave. The doctors of the era would have said the body was failing. The narration says he was given a choice. And he chose what he chose. In those final hours his closest companions and his wife were with him. His head rested in the lap of his wife. He kept repeating two things. He kept asking that the prayer, the act of standing 5 times a day in the direction of his Lord, be protected. That his community not abandon it. He said it in the way a person says something they are afraid will be forgotten. With the urgency of someone who cannot stay to make sure it happens, and is placing a trust in the hands of those who are staying behind. And then he said something else. Something that she read and then read again and then put the page down and sat with for a long time. He said, "My community. My community." Twice. Right at the end. When every word was costing him everything. He was not thinking about himself. He was not asking for anything for himself. He was thinking about the people he would be leaving behind. The people who had not been born yet. The people who would come 1400 years later and would never have seen his face and would carry his name in their hearts in countries and languages he had never encountered. He was thinking about them in his final moments. He was thinking about you. She sat with the book closed in her lap for a long time after she finished. And what she felt was not the distant sadness of reading about a historical figure. It was something more specific than that. The grief of missing someone. Real grief. For a person she had never met and would not meet until the day of judgment. For a man who spent his last breath thinking about her, a woman who would be born 14 centuries after he was gone. She had believed in him her whole life. She had sent prayers upon him regularly in the way she had been taught to do. But she had never felt him as a person in the specific way she felt him that night. As someone who had loved her, personally and specifically, before she existed. The Prophet's final days and final words are documented with remarkable detail in the historical record. His companions who were present narrated what they witnessed with a specificity of people who understood they were watching something they would need to describe accurately for everyone who came after. What he said at the end has been preserved in multiple narrations, and they are consistent. He repeatedly spoke about the prayer, the 5 daily acts of standing before Allah. He said, the prayer, the prayer. He said it in the way a person gives their final instruction about the most important thing they are leaving behind. And when you understand how central the prayer was to his entire life and teaching, how he described it as the dividing line between a believer and a person who has rejected the faith, how he said it was the first thing that would be examined on the day of judgment, how he described missing it deliberately as the destruction of everything, you understand why this was where his final energy went. He was not going through a checklist. He was protecting what he knew mattered most. And then the words "my community" repeated at the very end. The scholars have written about these words for over 1,000 years. Some with tears in the accounts of how they wrote about them. Because what these words reveal is the nature of his love for the people who would follow him. He had spent 23 years teaching, guiding, warning, encouraging, forgiving and leading. He had sent teachers to distant tribes. He had written letters to rulers of other nations. He had corrected his companions gently when they erred and praised them when they did well. He had never stopped thinking about the people. And at the end, when everything else had been said, the people were still on his mind. There is a hadith, a recorded statement of the Prophet, that his companions narrated about how he felt toward his community. He said, "I wish I could meet my brothers." His companions said, "Are we not your brothers?" He said, "You are my companions. My brothers are those who will come after and who will believe in me without having seen me." He was talking about you. He had thought about you before you existed. He had a specific feeling about you, the person who would follow him across 14 centuries without the advantage of his presence, without seeing his face, without hearing his voice directly. He called people like you his brothers and sisters before you were born. This is what the woman in this story sat with for a long time after she closed the book. Not a theological concept. A personal reality. She had spent her whole life practicing a faith and sending prayers upon a man she thought of as a historical figure. And that night she understood that she was not a distant follower at the end of a long line. She was someone he had specifically thought about. Specifically loved. Specifically hoped would hold what he had passed on. The sending of prayers and peace upon him, which every Muslim does whenever his name is mentioned, is not a ritual. It is a response to a love that was given first. He loved you before you loved him. He thought about you before you thought about him. He spent his last breath asking Allah to care for you. The least a Muslim can do is send that prayer back. If you want to read the full detailed account of the Prophet's life, his character, his teaching and the complete Islamic story, it is all in our Complete Muslim's Guide to Islam. There is a full chapter on who the Prophet was, his life from beginning to end, written in the same clear and detailed way. The link is in the description below. She reads that account every year now. Not on any particular occasion. When she needs to remember who she is practicing this faith for. When the prayer feels mechanical. When the connection feels distant. She goes back to that final morning and reads it slowly and lets herself feel what she felt the first time. The grief of missing someone real. The love of someone who loved her first. The Prophet is gone from this world. But what he left behind, the prayer he protected with his last words, the community he thought about with his last breath, is still here. Still being maintained. Still being passed from one generation to the next by people who never met him and love him anyway. You are one of those people. He knew you were coming. He asked Allah to take care of you. The very least you can do is send your prayers and peace upon him right now, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, and mean it. Share this with one Muslim who has never read the account of his final days properly. It might change something in how they carry this faith from this point forward.